One of the hardest things to do and one of the most important things to do in life, I believe, is to know thyself. And I think that right now, so many of us don't know ourselves. And as a result of it, our ego, our lack of self-awareness gets in the way. And what I think separates those breakthrough business leaders versus the mediocre in terms of their ability to achieve their vision comes down to that resilience and that grit to keep pushing. But it also comes down to high amounts of self-awareness.
Welcome to Design Your Life in Business, the podcast for leaders by BrightMind Consulting Group. We give you the necessary tools to help you become the architect of not just your business, but your life too. I'm your host, Jevon Wooden. What's going on, Pete? How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Feeling good. Feeling great, man. Another episode of Design Your Life in Business. Always honored to have a special guest with me, and the special guest is you. And I don't know if you know, Pete, but we start off fast. All right, so I'm going to start off with the first question. Who are you? Who is Pete Sena?
I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a friend. Those are sort of a lot of the spaces that I occupy. I'm also a creative entrepreneur. I've been building businesses for, it's almost 20 years at this point. I'm feeling old now. Probably actually over 20 years. But yeah, that's who I am a little bit, just in a nutshell.
That's awesome, man. So what was your journey like in entrepreneurship? What got you wanting to build all those businesses?
So I just always wanted to make cool shit for the internet. I'm a designer developer by trade. I have been writing code and pushing pixels since I was a little kid. So that kind of ultimately is what kicked off what turned into a series of other businesses that have, by some stretch of awesome, have just blossomed into the different businesses that I own and operate today. And I think how I got into it was really just curiosity, just being like, I want to make cool shit for the internet. And still to a large degree, I do that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You got a company. I love the name Digital Surgeons. First of all, how did you come up with that name?
So back in the day, basically, I was just like a young kid. I was getting brought into people's businesses. So at first it was like a local business or, I'd get a phone call and my nickname was Pete the Geek. And people would just call me for all kinds of stuff like, Pete, can you fix my computer? Pete, can you do this thing for me? So I was kind of like a bit of a jack of all trades. And some would say jack of all trades, master of none. But for me, I went really deep on a lot of these different topics. So where the name Digital Surgeons came about was I had landed a really large sports client that you may or may not have heard of the television channel for. And in doing that, I needed to form a business and I needed to create an LLC and a name and the whole thing. And I was always getting these people's digital projects and they were always a mess. And it was like I was having to go in, it was like a rat's nest of code, the files were all messy. And I was always having to do digital surgery on these businesses and these brands. So at the time when I was trying to kind of think of a name, I was like, what's a good name? And Digital Surgeons popped in my head. I Googled it and the domain was available, the name was available. And I was like, all right, awesome, I've got my name. So the original origin story of the name, I think what it's based on is something really inspiring. But now lovingly, we go by the name DS. Which is sort of like how most of our clients refer to us. We've kind of shortened it over time because digital is like oxygen. We all breathe it, right? We're on a digital conversation right now on Restream. We're doing this conversation digitally. So I feel like digital can just be dropped in a lot of ways. But yeah, that's where the name came from originally. We were constantly in the business of helping people transform their brands. But back then I didn't have all the fancy terms and vernacular that I have today. Back then it was like, oh, you just want to make cool shit for the internet. So that's ultimately how this.
And that's your tagline now.
Pretty much.
So I got to ask you though, man, you mentioned, and I didn't want to interrupt because you were flowing. You mentioned that you landed a big client without having the business in place. How the hell did you do that?
So the short version is I was working at Staples in the tech department. Back in the day, Staples, if you can believe it, had a tech department. People would bring their computers to. I'm old, I know. And we would have to fix computers and do software, take them apart. It wasn't like you'd go to the store today and you buy a computer. Back then you could upgrade computers, right? So people were putting more RAM in or swapping out drives. And it was a lot harder to do back then. Now you go on YouTube, you can teach yourself in 5 minutes how to do some of the stuff, right? So one of the guys I used to work with ended up, when he left the company, I was just a high school kid at the time, about to go into college. He left and he got a job at a monster sports network, which may or may not be based here in Connecticut. And when all that happened, he calls me one day and he's like in a panic and he's like, yo, Pete, do you know how to design websites? And I was like, yeah, of course I know how to design websites. You saw my MySpace page and we're going back and forth. And he's like, no, seriously, but do you know how to design websites? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like I do it all the time, no big deal. And he's like, well, I got this thing. It's this DirecTV thing. And like, it's this other thing for like the NCAA and blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't a big sports fan, but I knew that was a big deal. So I was like, yeah, I can help you. And I ended up getting that gig. And that's ultimately how it all began. In the beginning, it was sort of like a classic employer-employee relationship that my friend brought me in on, which is why I say your network is your net worth. It's a thing I say a lot. And that's where it all began. And then, from there, it's like a snowball going downhill. The more it spins, the more it moves, the more you do what you say you're going to do, the more the next thing happens. So ultimately, that's what led to it. And then,
wow,
the reputation started getting out. I always went above and beyond to deliver for my clients, whether it was a small, local pizzeria, and I've done work for them, or one of the largest sports companies on the planet, which may or may not be owned by Disney now. So it's like, that's just how I roll with everything I do, is like, you do what you say you're going to do. And then most people don't, right? Like showing up is like more than half of the gig in some cases. So like that just led to one thing. Referrals are everything, right? So much of our business is word of mouth. And then we'd make one cool thing and then another cool thing came in. And then I got a phone call from a local company called Thule. And they make roof racks and ski racks and stuff like that. You might have heard of them. And at the time, one of the people that was a photographer for them said to me, hey, Pete, we're trying to sell all this stuff online. And that's where I first learned about the word e-commerce, which I didn't know anything about, right? And again, nowadays it's like Shopify. You spin up a template, you're done, right? But back then, like stuff was way different. So he's like, yeah, we're trying to do e-commerce. I'm like, what is that? He's like, yeah, we're trying to sell these roof racks online. And there's all these different, things depending on the car you have and the size you have. And it's all custom. Can you build like a custom configurator? And I was like, I don't know, like, let's sit down and talk about it. So I went down to their offices, which were here in Connecticut where I live. And I sat down, I looked at all these different things in a warehouse. I said, okay, so there are these different sizes and how do you determine them? And you determine it by this and this and that, height and width. I'm like, these are some pretty easy formulas. I could figure that out. And I built a custom configurator for the internet. And then that was like, oh, now you can build these things. So at the time it was built in Flash and a bunch of other technologies that aren't around today. But then the word got out and people saw the work and they were like, okay, who built that? And they were like, oh, Digital Surgeons built that. At the time, Digital Surgeons was like me living in my mom and dad's basement, but nobody knew that, right? And they didn't ask. I wasn't going to lie if they asked, but it was like Digital Surgeons built it. So then they'd call on the website. I'd say Digital Surgeons, and they say, yeah, so we're looking to talk to the person that worked on this, roof rack configurator. And I would say, okay, let's talk about it. So I'm poking fun because that's truly how this went down. And then it's like, then I had more work than I had time for. And then I had to hire a developer. I happened to hire one of my childhood friends, right? Then I had more inquiries than I could handle. So I needed to bring on someone that could do sales and business development because sales was not my thing. I was the designer, coder, kind of techie. So that ultimately led to me bringing in my business partner, Dave, who's a brilliant entrepreneur. And we teamed up and we said, we're going to give it a try for a couple months. And now we've built multiple businesses together over the past 20 years. So it's
that's awesome, man.
It's a simple story. And I think most of the best stories are simple stories. And, a lot of hard work in between those milestones, obviously. And, we're a 20-year overnight success.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of lessons in there. One, you said your network is your net worth, and you went and you found this business partner that you have grown all these businesses with. So, I mean, you are living, breathing of all the cliche sayings that we all say, right? Your network is your net worth, and, you didn't turn down any work either. You were like, hey, yeah, I figured out. Let me see how I can do it.
In the beginning, I was doing crazy stuff, like in the early days, I was doing like e-flyers for radio stations and hip hop artists and, like all kinds of stuff. I mean, the types of projects I was taking ranged from like a dental office to like a poster for a 50 Cent like show, like literally like it ranged that much. Right. We touched a lot of things over the years.
So what do you guys typically focus in on now?
Yeah. So the way to think about me now is I'm a creative entrepreneur, right? So what does that mean, right? That means a couple of things. One, I invest in businesses, right? So I do a lot of angel investing where I will come in, I'll advise businesses, I'll write checks, I'll invest in those businesses. So that's a big thing I do. It's probably about 30% of my time. Another thing I do is I'm like the creative chairman for my company. So we've got a great leadership team in place now at Digital Surgeons that's running the company, it's growing the company. So what I do is I come in and work on our R&D projects. Like a lot of the work I'm doing right now is with AI and generative creativity. I bring in a lot of our key accounts, which typically are larger accounts, in the seven-figure range in terms of the size of the business. And then that's a big thing I do. And then I do a lot of fractional CMO work or chief marketing officer work, right? So if you've got a business or a brand, you can bring someone in like myself. I can help you take the vision out of your head, do what I call story selling, which is what's the story in your head? How do I manifest it, make it real? How do I build a brand strategy? Because I believe your story is your strategy, and how you express it makes a huge difference between success and failure. So that's a big thing of what I do. And companies will bring me in to kind of build a marketing strategy, build a branding strategy, get them go to market, and then drive that growth, right? So usually what that means is like if it's an early startup, I'd say you can categorize the clients I work with into three buckets, right? You've got venture-backed early startups, which are typically software as a service or like a consumer brand is a lot of the work that we do. And those are venture-backed typically. So they've got some seed capital or Series A or B round of capital funded. That's one business segment. Another business segment is what I call challenger brands, right? Challenger brands are brands that they're not number one in their market. Maybe they're number 2 to number 5. And they're looking to swim up market, right? They're looking to take on the David versus Goliath story, as I like to think about it, right? So that's where, as an underdog myself, I love helping underdog brands. That's a big part of what I do. The third business segment is what I call enterprise brands that have an innovative product or an innovative service, but they don't have an innovative brand. And what that means is they're bringing us in from a marketing automation perspective. So typically that's like a Fortune 500 business or a Fortune 1000 business. And we're coming in and helping them do what some people lovingly call digital transformation, which I just basically think at the most simple level is using design and technology to make your business run better, right? Like without all the buzzwords and shit. So that's the three things that I do. And where most of my time goes now is, working with brilliant leaders to help them tell their story and make sure that that story gets told in a way, whether it's on an Instagram ad or on a website or on a physical museum experience. I've done all of those things. It's about understanding how does that story track. So when you experience that brand, you know what they stand for, you know that it fits into your life, Jevon, and then it makes you want to purchase it. And then when you get that purchase, whether it's an email or the thing shows up in your doorstep, you love that thing so much, you want to tell all your friends about it. And then I just drive that kind of what they call the loyalty loop, right? So that's ultimately what I do in the most simple level. All my clients have one thing in common, which is they're looking to go forward, and that's what we do, or at least we try to do.
Yeah, and I love that you bring about the topic of the story, because I think that the story is super important in everything you're doing. If you don't have that, no one's going to care about your product or your service, right?
Amen.
And your taglines, yeah, absolutely. So, and your tagline ties into that, right? You say, I help forward obsessed founders like you unlock a clear story so you create a clear strategy. And I also noticed that you use the Ikage exercise, which is the reason for being, which I love, right? I saw that in your video. I peeped it, man. So, but why do you focus on creating your story first?
So if we think back to when we sat around the fire in caves or in the forest before we had civilization that we know today, we would send information to each other through different generations through stories, right? So everything starts from a story. If I said to you, there are 1,375,000 people every single year that die from this particular thing, you're not going to remember that number. But if I said, Jevon, out of the 10 people that you know, more than one of them is most likely going to get this particular disease or this particular thing. All you have to do is this one thing, and that number might go from 1 to 0. Now I make it personal. Now it's a story you can remember, you can pass forward, right? So what stories are is, in my opinion, it's like a file that you can embed in someone's consciousness that travels through multiple mediums and multiple generations. And I think it's that simplicity that lets the idea travel And when an idea can travel, it can get that much more viral. It can move from thing to thing. And that's ultimately why I think stories are so powerful, is because they're built into the operating system of the human condition. And our ability to tell that story right makes you decide that you're going to go with a Mac versus a PC, or you're going to jump yourself into an Adidas shoe or Adidas shoe versus a Nike shoe. Because we as consumers have all the choices in the world. So in a world with infinite choices, what's the singular biggest differentiator? It's your brand. So why not lean into that, right? And I think most people think that brands are like colors and fonts and like, what something looks like. Brand is the space you occupy in the hearts, minds, and wallets of your customer. Facts. Like, it's that simple. And when you can do that at scale, that's how you build a business that will outlive you as an individual, will outlive a year or a time frame. And we can see that with some of the biggest brands in the world is they started out with an idea, right? Phil Knight had an idea in his head, and that idea became Nike, right? So that's why I say stories are your strategy, is like why you have to really get down to that is like, if I said to you, like, what kind of people use Apple computers versus what kind of people use Macs, or sorry, excuse me, PCs, right? In your mind, you immediately have a mental model. It might be different than mine, but it's like Apple stands for this, PC stands for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we see it all the time, man. It's like they always say, statistics tell, but stories sell, right? Like you're saying.
I like that. I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, man. Statistics tell, but stories sell. And like you said, when you think about the top brands, the ones that we know, like, love, and trust, they have a certain aesthetic, they have a certain messaging, they have a certain tone, they have certain social causes they stand for. All that stuff is the key cohesiveness of the story they want to tell. So you spot on how you said it, man. I love that. Beautifully stated. Now, you mentioned that you are, Pete the Geek, right? So Web3, how has that impacted the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So what I would say is Web3 is a interesting concept to unpack, because I think it's more than just a set of technologies. So to answer the question very succinctly, what I would say is, for brands and businesses and products that are looking to take advantage of the future, that's where things like Web3 really comes into play. But in order for me to sort of break down Web3, I kind of have to break down the different phases of the internet, because the reason they call it Web3, and I'm sure you know this, right, but the audience might not know it, is that when we had Web 1, it was computers or clients connecting to servers, right? And sometimes those servers lived in people's basements. Sometimes those servers lived in a closet in a business's location. But if something happened to that particular business or that location, it wasn't in the cloud. We didn't have the cloud, right? So that was Web 1. It was sort of a two-way connection between, your internet browser, whether it was Netscape back in the day or Firefox or Internet Explorer, you connecting to that website. You're going through very basic protocols to do that. Web 2 stepped it up a little bit, right? They added in really interesting concepts like APIs, right? Where now we can connect different technologies together. And I like to think of Web 2 as like the glossy, bubbly version of the internet that had way too many widgets on a page, right? Weather widgets, like button widgets, right?
Right.
That was kind of like Web 2. But what Web 2 introduced is a new paradigm of doing business, right? Now businesses could integrate with one another, right? What an API was like a harbor where you can bring different ships in and out of a business, right? And that allowed you to do things at a different level of scale. You take that through its paces, and now you have the cloud that starts to show up, and now everybody's doing everything in the cloud. Cloud means it scales well. Cloud means it goes fast as more people use this stuff, right? Can you imagine trying to use Instagram, everybody connecting to a single server in Mark Zuckerberg's house? Not going to happen, right? So what the hell is Web3, right? So Web3 is this idea of a decentralized world. And by decentralized, what I mean is, instead of me and you, Jevon, worrying about Google or Amazon holding all of our data, holding all the cards, we can believe in something called a blockchain. We can believe in something called a smart contract. And these concepts really are what drives a lot of this Web3 movement, right? Most people hear Web3, they think crypto, they think NFTs, and they think shady shit.
They think scammers. Yeah.
Scammers happening on the internet, right? So for me, I think Web3 is transformational as a concept. I think there's a lot of ignorance in the world right now when it comes to how this stuff works, because it's the wild, wild west. It's brand new. But I'm betting on the builders. I've got a lot of my faith and involvement in this space. Some of my best friends, the smartest people I know, I've met in the world of Web3, whether it's on a Discord or as part of a project that I'm an investor in, be it an NFT project or a blockchain that's not, Ethereum or a common blockchain. So Web3 is a concept I think is about trust. It's about being able to say, you know what? Instead of relying on a central bank, instead of relying on a central server or a single entity, we're going to sort of be one of the people where we're all going to decentralize that. Now, why is that important, right? So now if you can decentralize banks, then you can do different things with currency. If you can make things that much more secure, then losing a physical wallet doesn't matter anymore because you have a cryptography aspect of a wallet that you can then take forward into different places, right? You can trade that multi-generational. A lot of powers there. And most importantly, in a world where my kids, when they grow up, they're not going to know the difference between IRL and the digital life, right? The world is just going to be the world. So what that means is if me and you are showing up in Mark Zuckerberg or Tim Cook's version of the world through the Apple Vision Pro or the next iteration of that Meta headset, if we're showing up in a world of hybrid reality, of spatial computing, what am I going to show up in? I'm going to be wearing a shirt, right? I'm going to be wearing, clothes. I'm going to signal what something means to me, right? So right now I'm wearing a $20 t-shirt because I don't give a shit about spending money on a Balenciaga, right? So my $20 t-shirt, but I've got all the coolest tech around me, right? I'm going to jump into a Tesla, not a specific type of car, because that's going to send a signal of what I believe in, right? Whether it's the environment, sustainability, high-tech cars, whatever it is, right? So why does that matter? Well, it matters because if I bought a digital good, I can prove it's mine because it's chain of custody. That is not possible with a t-shirt. It is absolutely possible with a non-fungible token or an NFT. And these technologies, these things are made present and powerful because of the blockchain and because of Web3. So if you can't tell by now, I'm really excited about this technology because I think that what's happening right now is we're living in a world that is shifting, but people are just chasing the next buzz, right? So we move, crypto crashed, crypto's a scam, NFTs are never going to go anywhere. And now the whole world's AI. The AI, I think, is going to slow down a little bit, in my opinion, even though what I will say is AI is a lot more transformational to the human condition than the blockchain is. But give the blockchain 50 years. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. I mean, Chase is heavy on blockchain. They got a whole arm just investing in blockchain and how they can leverage it. So, yeah, it's not going anywhere. And a lot of people probably don't even know that. And then with AI. Yeah, exactly.
Still investing. Because the reality is, like, when you look at all these ETF funds that are popping up, you look at all these different things that are happening, index funds, whatever. I'm very happy with where I got in at Ethereum, Bitcoin, and Tezos and all the different chains because, like, it's going to go low before it goes high. But when it goes high, a couple $100 is going to be worth a couple $1,000,000 if you did it at the right time.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like any stock, right? It's like, like Warren Buffett said, buy when it's low, right? Buy when it's high, but just buy, right? You don't really technically lose money until you sell the dang on thing anyway, right? Just crashes completely. And that's
Uncle Warren, man. I'm all about Uncle Warren.
Absolutely. Yeah. As long as you understand it, you can go ahead and make that money. That's all it is. But you have been a part of a lot of exits, 20, probably in counting now, 20 exits and IPOs for various organizations, right? Ranging from the startups you were talking about to Fortune 500 enterprises. What are some top lessons you have gleaned from those experiences?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is never want to take credit for somebody else's success, right? So one thing I would say is I've worked with a lot of amazing clients and I've been a tiny part of their growth. And then some clients have been a big part of their growth. So one thing I want to just say is that it takes a village to get anything done. So I put that out in terms of the number of exits that I've been a part of. These are not businesses that I founded, started, and exited. So just one for the audience so that you guys don't come in comments. I just
thank you for being real about it, man. We appreciate it.
Never gonna bullshit. There's way too much of that bullshit out there. I am not gonna go get into a private jet after I get off this conversation. I'm gonna get in a car just like everybody else does. So yeah, but PJs are cool, right? I've been on a few, but they have not been mine. So, but in all seriousness, I think what I've learned from this thing is you have to have a clear vision. You have to rally a team around that vision. And you have to not be afraid to fall, to fuck up, to make mistakes, and to keep going. And I think what I've seen with some of these visionary leaders I've had the ability to be in the room with, or work with, or have their trust in some cases, is what it comes down to is you have to be able to do what you say you can do. And it sounds stupid, it sounds trivial, but like ideas are nothing without execution. And just like vision without execution is hallucination. And unless you're doing mushrooms, you don't want to hallucinate, right?
Ooh, I love that.
Like that. Thank you. So I think that's just one thing I would say is like what all of them have in common is like a almost religion to following their vision and sticking with it and overcoming things with all odds. And that's why I'm so big into branding. And brand is something I don't think a lot of people understand. And brand is something that I think can transform a business when you really think about how to do that. And that's what a lot of these businesses did is they created a market out of nowhere, right? So I'm so dedicated to building businesses that I started a podcast called Forward Obsessed, where I go out and I find those business owners, those breakthrough business leaders that have built and exited companies. And just like we're talking right now, I interview them. I ask the tough questions. I figure out the pivots, the pitfalls, the roller coaster of business, as my partner and I like to call it. And it's up and it's down. But I think that the problem that we live in right now is that everybody wants that quick buck, that quick hustle, but nobody wants to do the work. And that's the thing that I realize is like, it's lonely at the top. And that's a true statement because the reality is the people who are willing to climb those mountains, there's a lot of sacrifice you have to make to climb those mountains. There's no easy way to the top. You know, I mean, obviously there's easy ways to make money, but you know, most of those easy ways to make money will end up, you know, you either end up like Madoff or you end up like, you know, some people in jail or whatever it is. So I think that you got to be careful with those kinds of things. But those are some of the insights I've learned from working with those businesses is like the power of brand, the power of vision, and also like thinking about network effects and how things scale, right? So like most of the businesses I mentioned in that 20 that have, you know, exited, those businesses were typically things that had network effects built into them. Mm-hmm. They built marketplaces. They built interesting things that transformed people's lives, whether those were physical products or digital products. And I think what a lot of them have in common is really deeply understanding their customer, knowing the pain that the customer faces, and then selling them a transformation, right? So what's the world like today? What's the world like tomorrow with your product or service? And when you can capitalize on that, like your business can grow like hotcakes.
And you said something, knowing your clientele, knowing that client base, because that's who the story is for, right? We're not telling it to big up ourselves. We're telling it, so like I said, so you can sell them, but you're not selling them that product or that service that you do. And that's where that whole benefits versus features topic comes in. A lot of business owners, we're so proud of our baby that we forget why we created the baby. What problem are you solving? You know, how are you solving it? And who is it for? And then, you know, because I hear a lot of people like, you know, when they talk to you, they say, oh, I serve this particular person. But then if you look at their messaging, it has nothing to do with that, right? The messaging is all about I. So I'm glad you 100%. Said that, man.
I mean, listen, I interview marketers all the time, Jevon, like either for my clients or for my teams or whatever. And what I first ask is, in my mind, the first question I always ask is, I'm trying to learn first and foremost, are you selling vitamins or are you selling painkillers? And most marketers are selling vitamins, and vitamins are okay, but like people are looking for painkillers, right? How are you going to change their life? And I mean that metaphorically, obviously. But
great analogy.
I think that to me is something that, when done right, marketing messaging and visual language, when you pair those two things together, that's where you get the essence of a brand. What I always say to people is it's the essence, the expression, and the ecosystem. When you connect all three of those things, you've got like this core cluster, we call it brand DNA, and that brand DNA can kind of scale to the next thing. So yeah, that's something that I think about a lot is like, how do you get those pieces to come together? And really for me, the formula I've developed over the years with my teams and my friends and my clients, it's pretty simple now. But it took me 20 years to get to that formula because it's like the Coca-Cola magic, right? How do you get to it? Whole lot of freaking experimentation. There are no golden tickets, you know?
Absolutely, 100%. And the experimentation is always taking place, right? So R&D is forever. That's what I always tell people. Like, you need to have, I don't care if you are just a service, you need to have R&D, right? You need to be setting some money aside to do that. Because or else
Yeah.
you're just going to die, right?
I didn't find one solution. I found 999 things that didn't work.
Exactly. Absolutely, man. So you wrote an article that I thought was very interesting titled Unlock Your Business Potential with the 10-80-10 formula, the secret to scaling your creative empire. Can you explain that formula to us?
I absolutely can. So there's an amazing book. I can't remember which one it is, but there's a number of different books. One of the ones that I really got a lot of value from recently was a book by Dan Martell called How to Buy Back Your Time. And he talks about 10-80-10 a little bit, but actually the 10-80-10 I'm talking about, I pulled from a lot more ancient wisdom, right? So when you think about how to scale yourself, like we all have time. So what 10-80-10 is essentially you want to, if you're going to build an empire, if you're going to build a scalable business that scales beyond you, you have to empower and set up a set of principles and teams and people that can take things forward, right? Right now, there's no business that exists that is 0 to 100% done through AI yet. I do think we'll see that in the next few years. But for right now, it requires people in some degree, right? So what 10-80-10 is all about is like, if you're going to create something scalable and repeatable, that first 10% is all about putting your upfront vision in. What is the vision you have for this project, for this brand, for this thing, right? It's empowering people to then do the 80% in the middle. And then you're coming back like a curator, like a orchestra conductor, like a director in a film, and you're shaping that final 10% to make sure that your vision in the beginning and your vision in the end comes out on the other side of that process. And that's what 10-80-10 is about. And why I was so passionate about that article, and I appreciate the fact that you read it, was because what I realized is so much of my career, I was doing way too much of the work. And I don't mean work is in terms of giving someone else the work, but what I mean specifically is like, what great leaders know how to do is create leverage. And the best way you can create leverage is to start to build processes and systems and teams and people that can execute against your vision with you, alongside you, and on your behalf. And Absolutely. The example I gave in that article was Andy Warhol, right? And Andy Warhol, the artist, if you're not familiar, I wasn't familiar until I dove in and went deep on this, was like Andy Warhol, the artist, he was able to essentially manufacture a style that he had, almost like a factory. He actually had an art studio called The Factory, which is kind of cool. And he was able to create all these different pieces of work because he scaled this process and he's able to then scale himself. So I referenced that in the article. It's why the image kind of has that like Andy Warhol kind of look to it.
Right. And you call it the factory. I think you call it the factory model or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. So that's what the 10-80-10 rule is. So the question I ask you, or I ask your audience, is when you think about something that you do, whether it's, making a product or delivering a service, are you setting the vision, doing that 10% in the beginning, 10% in the end? Or are you working 60, 70% of it, doing it all yourself? And that's one of the things that I learned the hard way is like, people don't scale, technology scales. So what you have to really think about is if people don't scale and you only scale to a certain degree, how do you then create a force multiplier? How do you create additional leverage? It comes down to those systems. And that's what 10-80-10 is all about, is figuring out what role you're going to play in that system so that you can buy back more of your time. And that ultimately is why I love that book, Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell, who's a very successful SaaS founder. He built a software business. I think he sold it at like 30 or something like that. He built a great company called the SaaS Academy, which, really smart guy. Someone sent me a copy of his book when it first came out, and I was inspired by it because I was always thinking 10-80-10 in terms of direction.
Right.
But I was not thinking 10-80-10 in terms of like, you want to buy back that 80 in the middle. And I was like, oh shit, I never thought about that.
Yeah, I love that. I love it because it ties into, I have what I call the 3DA formula. And it's delegate, delete, delay, and automate. And it's all about owning your time, right?
I love that.
Yeah, so that's something I use with my clients as well, is how do we buy back that time? I hadn't thought about it from the 10-80-10 formula framework, but yeah, I like that. So
yours sounds cool. I like that. I want to create an infographic on that and call it a day.
Hey, let's do it. Let's make it happen, man. I appreciate that. So are there any books? Because you clearly your stuff, man. You invest, you're angel investing, you're doing all types of stuff, helping tons of businesses. So are there any like books and resources? You just mentioned one that you would share as sources of inspiration or influence on your journey?
If I start sharing books that inspire me right now,
I see the behind you, y'all. If you're listening on On the show, you can't see it, but if you're on YouTube, you can see.
We're going to be here for a while. So let's pick a topic or a problem that someone's facing. I'll have you pick one, and then I can sort of give some specific books that I think will reference that, because otherwise, I'm a voracious reader. I mean, I crush books, audiobooks, physical books. So give me a problem or a topic, and I'll hone that in for you in the audience.
Let's do it. Okay. Let's since we're talking about designing life and business, how about one about overcoming life's obstacles?
So I'm a huge fan of Angela Duckworth and the work that she's done around grit. So grit, I think, is something that's really powerful. So you've probably heard of EQ, like emotional quotient. A lot of people have heard of IQ, right? So IQ is like how smart you are. That you can't really change that number much. EQ, you can absolutely change. It's your emotional quotient, your self-awareness, how you engage with other people. What Angela talks a lot about is this idea of AQ, or your adversity quotient. And one of the things I think is really fascinating about her work and her research specifically is she dives into resilience and what it means to keep going. When I think about the one thing that has really benefited me, I'm not the smartest, I'm not the fastest, but I'm definitely the hardest working, right? And I think for me, it's that concept of like the tortoise and the hare, right? Is like that tortoise just doesn't give up. He or she just keeps going and going and going. And that, I think, is what I attribute my success to. It's like just like being too stubborn to give up. And I think that's that concept of resilience, that concept of grit, being able to sort of work through something even when the times get rough. That's the thing I think that we're missing in business right now. We got a lot of smart people, got a lot of creative people. We don't have a lot of resilient people. We don't have a lot of people who are anti-fragile. That's another great book, is the book Anti-Fragile by, I think, Talib Nassim. He also wrote the Black Swan book about like Black Swan events and stuff. But I think that book Grit really stands out to me. I'm also a huge fan of the book Essentialism, which talks a lot about like living a minimal lifestyle and reducing the clutter in your life. So that's another book that comes to mind that's really inspiring to me. It's funny you mentioned designing your life. I think Bill Burnett, one of the people from Stanford's D School or IDEO, I think he works more with IDEO as well, wrote a book called How to Design Your Life. And it follows a format of design thinking, which is kind of a systems thinking framework for how do you apply observation and design to anything. And he does it on the sense of your life. So that's a great book. It comes with a workbook if you buy the physical copy of it. And I just think that like one of the hardest things to do and one of the most important things to do in life, I believe, is to know thyself. And I think that right now, so many of us don't know ourselves. And as a result of it, our ego, our lack of self-awareness gets in the way. And what I think separates those breakthrough business leaders versus the ones that are, let's say mediocre in terms of their ability to achieve their vision is it comes down to that resilience and that grit to keep pushing. But it also comes down to high amounts of self-awareness, right? I think what Jim Collins talks about in his book, Good to Great, which I think is one of the best business books of all time, still to this day, is he talks about different levels of leadership, right? And this level 5 leader. And I think that for me, one of the things I'm really inspired by is when I work with and I get to be around leaders that are level 5 leaders. And that's where you just see a whole different level. So if you want to read about like different levels of leadership, Jim Collins' Good to Great, it's a great book. And then the other books that we mentioned. So I hope those are helpful.
Awesome. Those are very helpful, man. I appreciate it. You are like a walking library, man.
I'll tell you a funny story. So when I was a little kid down the street from my house, there was a group of sisters and they were all older than me and I was the young kid. And they used to make fun of me and they used to call me Petri Dictionary. And the reason they called me Petri Dictionary is because when I was a little kid, I used to read the dictionary. I would carry around a dictionary. And there was like Petri Dictionary, like Land Before Time, kind of a kid. It's like a kid's movie, I guess. But yeah, so I think for me, education was not something that ran deep in my family. I was actually the first person in my family to go to college and to finish college. And I think as a result of it, we looked at education a lot differently in terms of the way that I grew up. So as a result of it, I was in the early parts of my life and career, I constantly had a bit of a chip on my shoulder because I didn't have an MBA. And I was dealing with a lot of MBAs in branding and CPG and that sort of world. So for me, I had to sort of get myself the MBA. And the best way to do that was to read my way to the MBA. I also struggled with a lot of mental health issues when I was younger. And I found that reading helped to clarify my thoughts. Reading helped me because I'm so visual. I was visualizing these worlds within worlds. And I think that it was a source of inspiration for me to create these like what I call meta mentors, META, like these are mentors that I never met in person, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Sarah Blakely, like, all these amazing leaders that I learned so much from because I bought a $30 book. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm deeply passionate about that topic, is just because of those things. So
yeah, well, we share a lot of similarities, man. I'm the same way when it comes to education. Graduating from school, that's not a norm where I come from. Especially in my family.
Where'd you grow up?
And then mental health. I grew up in Rochester, New York.
Nice.
So yep. So it wasn't a norm, and then the family, the dynamic, and then I call them virtual mentors, but yours is cooler, meta mentors.
I like that. Virtual mentor is probably easier to explain.
Absolutely, man. So we're going to shift to the by design segment, where I ask every guest the same 3 questions. Let's roll, man. What has been the hardest part about designing a life and business you don't need a vacation from?
I don't believe that any business or any life doesn't need a vacation from, to be honest. So we'll start with that.
Awesome. So mentally though, think mentally, don't think philosophically, don't think physically.
So I like to think of success as the continuum between joy and fulfillment. Mm-hmm. And I like to think of our lives like batteries that need to be recharged. And I believe that one of my beliefs in the world is that creativity and curiosity are broken. I believe that they're broken in business, and I believe that they're broken in our lives. And I believe that when we can live more creative, more fulfilled, more curious lives, we can reach joy and fulfillment at a different level. So I think that in a lot of cases, not everyone knows what they want to do. So I think that variety is the spice of life, and we have to keep experimenting, right? Novelty, our brains crave novelty, the same way that we have all these dopamine receptors, why we keep flicking on Instagram, right? So the thing I would say is to create a life that you don't want to go on vacation. There's a lot of times where I'll go on vacation, but I'm like still connected.
Right.
For me, what that is a lot of novelty. It's a lot of so in my business, marketing, innovation, branding, it's changing all the time. You're always having to stay on top of the next thing. And while under the hood, it's pretty much philosophically the same, the tactics change, the strategies change so quickly, right? Nowadays with all this AI shit, all these different things, right? So for me, that keeps me going. The ADHD in my brain, always wanting to chase the next thing. I find solace in that. I find a lot of joy in experimentation and creativity. So in my work, I get to solve business problems all day long, and every day is a new day. Every day is a new challenge. So for me, it's that variety, it's that creativity that lights me up and that charges my battery. But on the flip side of it, as an entrepreneur, it's very tiring, right? You've got really hard days. You've got sleepless nights sometimes. It's not the classic 9 to 5. It's a grind, right? Let's keep it real for everybody listening. It's a grind, but
definitely is.
If you have a sense of purpose and you have a sense of control over the decisions you make, that's a game changer. And like for me, I think about in the early days, right? The early days where I was paying myself like $20,000, $30,000 a year, right? Like barely getting by to just, living on that like ramen life as some people talk about. And I'm not talking about Brooklyn ramen. I'm talking about like the cheap shit, right? And I had friends of mine that worked for corporate that were making well over 6 figures, high 6 figures, and I was just grinding it out. That wasn't gratifying, right? That I needed a vacation from that. But in my mind, I saw the peak of the mountain. I saw the vision in my head unfolding. I manifested that vision, and no differently from Arnold Schwarzenegger thinking he's going to become Mr. Olympia, or like all these different entrepreneurs that have come before us, these giants and titans that have gone on to achieve their visions and goals. On the other end of that struggle is the other end of that sacrifice is joy and fulfillment. So for me, that's how it manifested for me. I'm saying it's different for everybody, but like, absolutely. I think what's important is you have to know that no matter what you do, no matter what job you have, whether you're an entrepreneur, just an employee, whatever it is, things are going to drain your battery. So the goal is you got to make sure you have enough things to recharge your battery. You got to make sure you have a sense of purpose, understand what your why is. And that is one thing that I would say. Like one of my favorite quotes is a Mark Twain quote, Jevon. It says, the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you realize why.
Yes.
And that sense of purpose, I think, is super important. So for me, I knew as an introverted kid coming up, I wanted to make interesting things happen with design and technology. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do then, but I knew I wanted to be a tinkerer and I wanted to play with design and technology. I always wanted to be on the cutting edge. And it was that understanding, that self-awareness, I think, that led to me building a pretty crazy service business, right? Like service businesses don't scale the way that SaaS businesses scale. I don't invest in service businesses. All the businesses that I invest in are either software companies or product companies. Right. But here I am, going on building a 7 then 8 figure business that's a service business. So you'd probably be like, why the fuck did you do that, Pete? And the answer is because my superpower is being able to take in all these different things as an ADHD kind of neurodivergent type, connect all those dots together. And what I learned working on this basketball brand or with Lady Gaga on this music brand, I can now apply to a grill brand. And it might sound like there's nothing in common, but that unique wisdom, that side design thinking is what gives me my competitive advantage. So that's why when I see that competitive advantage and the value we can unlock in people's lives, it recharges my battery. And that's where like I get more than I give. And if that changes one day, I'm going to pivot and I'll do something different. But I think that's really important because what I don't want to do is be on the show here with you and your audience and say, everything's going to be peaches and roses and rainbows, because that is not true. And anybody that's got like the Kim Kardashian life that you see on Instagram, if you want that life too, you got to put the grind in to make it happen. And let me tell you, she puts the grind in to make that happen.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for that. Love that. Love it. You covered so much in that. I could have another show on everything you just said there. But I'm going to go to the next question. What is the best lesson you've learned from your entrepreneurial journey?
Failure is inevitable.
I don't even think you need to say anything more. I think that one landed. It was a mic drop, but I got to ask you another question. So what are 3 tools or tips you would recommend when scaling a business?
First, know what the big vision is in the North Star of that business. Where are you? Where are you headed? Understand the big why behind that vision, right? So the big why behind the vision is first. Second, think about systems early. Systems are repeatable things that you can do to maintain a standard of output and a standard of quality that is repeatable. And then third is, as much as in the early parts of your career, you're probably going to want to invest in what I call hard skills, right? Hard skills being like coding, designing, marketing, sales, all those different kinds of nuanced things. Mm-hmm. Soft skills are the ones that really scale you. So leadership ability to motivate and inspire people, ability to recruit and hire the right talent, ability to shape a vision. Those are some of the things that show up for me. But what I would say is, so soft skills, systems, and a clear strategic vision, I think are the 3 things that a business needs to really scale, no matter what industry it's in, no matter if you're selling popcorn or pop sockets.
Love it, man. Love it. I appreciate it, man. It's been so awesome having you on the podcast, man. Really appreciate everything you brought, the energy. Glad you slammed that coffee. So it's all good. But how can everyone connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm Pete Senna on most of the platforms. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on Twitter, Pete Senna. I write a newsletter on petesenna.com, which is a free newsletter. I put it out twice a month. Right now, a lot of the topics I'm covering is like teaching people how to automate their life with AI. So I kind of give a lot of my tips and tricks. Write that twice a month. So that's petesenna.com. And then if you want to learn more about like the brand transformation work that me and my teams do, you can check out digitalsurgeons.com. And I'm sure I'll pop that in the show notes. But yeah, I'm pretty easily searchable.
All right, man. Really appreciate you. And any last words for the guests, for the audience, I should say?
I just want to say thank you to you for having me on the show, and thank you for the audience. I hope you got some value from this, and definitely let me know what value you did get from this, if any. I'm always looking for feedback. I think feedback is the greatest gift that we can all get. So please share it and give it to me.
I appreciate that, Pete, for sure. And we'll see you soon, man.
That's good. Take care.
Design Your Life in Business, the podcast for leaders, is brought to you by BrightMind Consulting Group. To find out more about BrightMind Consulting Group and how you can become the best leader possible, visit brightmindconsultinggroup.com. Make sure you search for Design Your Life and Business on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at BrightMind Consulting Group, we cannot thank you enough for listening.